Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome Dr. Fuhrman, Dr. Pai, and Dr. Kahn. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Steve. Pleasure.
Thank you, Steve.
So for our audience, I just want to say a few things on why this panel is very unique. All these speakers are medical doctors. They all treat patients. They all live a whole food plant-based diet. They are authors. They are smart. They are open-minded, curious, and they do extensive research. I don't know if you follow them outside of this, but they do extensive research and appear to be very, very curious to find out the truth. So to be able to gather them and say, what have you found? So that we don't have to spend our life trying to dig through all this detailed information to get answers. I consider this incredibly valuable, and I'm very grateful that we have this opportunity. So when we started the Real Truth About Health, like 10, 12 years ago, I thought I was, I guess 48, 47, I was having fun. Now I'm 59, I'm turning 60. And unfortunately, I know people that have gotten sick. So I feel less like this is a playful discussion comparing diets to urgent, that I really understand the truth, because real people in my real life have had very real health challenges, and some have passed away. And so I would like to be the most accurate I can in telling people the truth. We don't sell products. I don't really want to have an agenda. I'd like to tell people the most accurate information if I could find out what it is. So to get started, I want to show you something from today from one of our lectures. So first, I hope I didn't misquote you, Dr. Fuhrman, but I think I've heard you say that you've been dealing with long-term vegans, and there are some long-term vegans that you've dealt with that ended up with dementia. And therefore, you had to be smart and careful about how you approached your health, because it's not a guarantee just because you're plant-based that you are out of the woods.
Right, not just long-term vegans, but super healthy eating long-term vegans. Because people say a vegan diet doesn't have to be healthy. You could eat junk food on a vegan diet. But these were people who were eating a whole food, plant-based diet of all natural foods, fruits and vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, and they were not anything. They were from the natural hygiene movement and from the American Vegan Society, but mostly from the natural hygiene movement of people who developed problems in their later life. And part of the reason is that most people aren't getting demented because they're omega-3 fatty acid deficient. They're getting demented because they're eating meat and cheese and bacon and cheeseburgers and pizza, and they're phytochemical deficient. Their diet's high in saturated fat. They have poor circulation of blood to the brain. And so the average American, it's only a small percent of the people on a standard American diet that are deficient by omega-3 fatty acid deficiencies. But in a super healthy vegan eating population who doesn't have all those risks for dementia, the fact that they would get dementia, there has a different reason why they're getting dementia. So the argument that, there's not more dementia in vegans than non-vegans, so there can't be this, but that's a mythical and incorrect argument. We shouldn't see any dementia in vegans if we're doing everything right. And obviously, I feel I'm the physician with the most experience being in practice for, 40 years dealing with this population, because when I got into this movement, I was 18, I was a kid, and I got, when I was going to these conferences at 18 and 19 years old, and my mentors, the people I respected, I was learning from, that I admired, and when they got older, I was a physician. They were now 30, 40 years older than me, or, they're 60 and I'm 20, and then they became 80 and I became 40. And you know what I'm saying? So a lot of these people who I knew very well from my young years, I saw this population of people who I expected to live a long, long life, did not. And some of them died prematurely of Parkinson's disease, like Dr. Sidwa and Dr. Shelton, and some had, and a lot of these people from the movement, because I was a physician, a lot became my patients, a lot of people from the plant-based movement. So I was one of the physicians, the pioneers, treating people following a healthy plant-based diet way before this became this popular, and seeing people in there, that started this in the 1950s and 60s. So I'm more alert to the potential risks of what are the potential, missing links in a vegan diet that could result in a person developing some neurological problems later in life.
Okay, so hold on. So just to go back a step. So there's a lot of people. We have 80 speakers at this conference. And one of the general themes is a whole food plant-based diet. And a lot of people are saying, keep your fat low, keep your cholesterol low, keep your saturated fat low, which is very common. I want to just play you a video. I'm not trying to create like drama. I really want to just know clearly. Gabriel Cousin spoke today. He's 80 years old. He said a bunch of things, and I'm going to show you what he said. And then I'd like for each of you to give me your thoughts so you could help clarify, because it's kind of a very big issue. And again, the goal of The Real Truth About Health is to be accurate, not to just follow the momentum. And I don't know, I don't have the background to interpret this, so I'd like if the three of you would. So could we play the highlight video from Gabriel's lecture today? And then I'd like for each of the three of you to share your thoughts with us.
And a high carbohydrate diet. So when Joe Fuhrman talks about, well, he sees a lot of people with vegans with brain degeneration. I look at the high carbohydrate diet, which I don't support because it stimulates brain inflammatory pathways. Now, to me, this is a really important study, Journal of Alzheimer's 2012. I'm just going to read it because it's so important. Older people, and we're talking people above 60, eating a high carbohydrate diet. Get the word high carbohydrate because we're told a lot in the vegan world that you want a high complex carbohydrate diet. People are talking about 70% carbohydrate. Yeah, well, here's the result. Have nearly 4 times the risk of developing mild cognitive impairment. So this is what David Perlmutter in his book, Grain Brain, I thought he did really good work. A diet heavy in inflammatory carbohydrates, which mostly they are, low in healthy fats, messes with the mind in more ways than one. But let's say messes with the brain in more ways than one. So fat is the preferred fuel of human metabolism, and it's been that way through evolution until we started farming about 10,000 years ago. Next slide, please. Now, this is really important because along with this high complex carbohydrate diet, we just have this cholesterol fear. And this is one of the second reasons I think that vegans tend to get more Alzheimer's, because people with the highest cholesterol scored higher on cognitive tests than those with lower cholesterol levels. So this is I'm really talking more about cholesterol here, but Netherlands, Alzheimer's have lower amounts of cholesterol, free fatty acids in their cerebrospinal fluid. That is really important. As 2007 study showed that people who regularly consumed omega-3, this is one of the supplements I'm going to talk about, they were 60% less likely to develop dementia than those who didn't regularly consume such oils. That's DHA and EPA. High cholesterol is associated with better memory function. And it's the preferred fuel for your heart. I mentioned so atrial fibrillation, high omega-3, 85% lower risk of dying from all causes.
Okay, go ahead.
You want me to start?
Whoever would like to go, could each go one after.
Oh, I can make a few comments.
Sure.
So it's a little bit missing information so people understand what he's saying. One of the information, it's true that high carbohydrate, you have to determine the type of carbohydrate, not just high carbohydrate intake. Certainly, we know that processed carbohydrates and high glycemic carbohydrates linked to increased risk of dementia. And high glycemic diets are also lead to 87% increased risk of breast cancer as well. But that's because they're studying non-bean carbohydrates. When you substitute beans, which are another high carbohydrate food, for the carbohydrate they're using in the study, you don't see those same negative effects. So it's not it's the type of carbohydrate that plays a huge role. Beans are the example of the ultimate slowly digestible carbohydrates that have more resistant starch, and and also more higher in protein. But in any case, it's all about what food they're comparing it to. And a lot of these studies are using muffins as their carbohydrate source. It's like another author saying fat is bad because the fat, when you eat fat, you get fatter. But the study on that is showing oil against a muffin, showing oil is worse than a muffin. It's not oil compared to a nut. So in other words, they're not giving all the information so people can make a clear distinction here. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that I am saying that both my experience and the overwhelming amount of evidence in the scientific literature show that some people genetically don't convert the fats, the ALA and the beneficial fatty acids from green vegetables and hemp seeds and walnuts into more efficiently into EPA and DHA. So there's a continuum of variance between one person and another and what their omega-3 index is. And the omega-3 index correlates exceptionally well with shrinkage of the brain and cognitive impairment in later life. And also low omega-3 index in the blood, which the people, I think that there's general agreement in the scientific literature, and Dr. Cousins is certainly bringing this out in those studies, that low omega-3 index in the blood is also linked to more inflammation and more propensity to develop even Parkinson's and other toxic mediated xenobiotic, which are toxins in the external environment. The body's less resistant to xenobiotic damage when you have a pro-inflammatory state with a low omega-3 index. And those were my findings on these healthy eating vegans, that some of them who developed low omega-3 index had an increased probability of developing dementia or Parkinson's. And I don't want that to happen to people I recommend. On the other hand, just like we're talking about fat, or just like we're talking about carbohydrate, it's the type of fat and the type of carbohydrate that's important to make sure we're addressing right now. And because fish eaters also have, in the past, have had better omega-3 balance and has some advantages. The fish of yesteryear is not the fish of today, with all the microplastics, the BMAA the runoff from agriculture, fish farming, and commercial fertilizers that penetrate the waterways, and we have overbloom, algae bloom, and cyanobacteria and other toxins in the water that we're really taking our life at risk from eating all these toxic fish. And so, in other words, we're trying to get the benefit, and so I'm saying to people is that don't ignore your omega-3 index on a vegan diet. It is important because the low omega-3 index increases your susceptibility, and a low omega-3 index is also associated with atrial fibrillation, as Dr. Cousins said as well. But overtaking fish oils and too much of that can also increase risk of cardiac arrhythmias. But we're also demonstrated that the ultra low fat diet, by avoiding nuts and seeds, recommended by a lot of nutritional gurus or people that participate in these conferences for years and have excited a lot of the vegan community to think low fat is better by avoiding nuts and seeds, is not a scientific viewpoint. It's an anti-science viewpoint, because the science shows that increased levels of nuts and seeds in the diet decrease all-cause mortality, especially cardiovascular mortality, by about 40% in many different studies that corroborate each other. Tremendous benefits from eating nuts and seeds. And if we go on to subjects of meat versus, animal products versus cause of death, the most important data we have is when people switch meat from some other healthy, not when they switch meat to chicken or switch meat to bread or rice or pasta, you don't see much improvement. It's when they switch from meat to nuts and seeds, or meat to beans, but meat to nuts and seeds have more protective effects, or lowering animal protein and from all sources of animal protein, and increasing plant protein from nuts and seeds is what science shows has the most powerful effect at reducing cardiovascular death and extending human lifespan. I'll let the other people comment now.
Thank you.
I'll jump in, JoelnKahn. Some of what Dr. Cousins speaks about is totally consistent with Joel Fuhrman's long stand, and something that I've agreed with, which is that there are ultra low fat plant-based diets, and I still use them very selectively in people that can't walk to the mailbox without angina, and people with, avoiding bypass with critical 3 vessel coronary disease. I think there's still a role. But Dr. Fuhrman has argued for years that nuts and seeds and a higher fat version of a whole food plant-based diet is healthier. I agree with him. There was internally a rather big fight among some of the plant-based stocks in the last few years. This is public now, but we watched Dr. Michael Clapper agonize over this issue and recently announced on a very widely viewed YouTube that he has come over to Dr. Fuhrman and my side that you can measure. People need to know this. There's a blood test. Dr. Fuhrman alluded to it, but very few patients get it. The omega-3 index or omega check. If you're eating hemp and chia and flax, get your blood checked. And if you're a poor converter over to EPA, DHA, add some algal oil, EPA, DHA, and get your level up, or you do put your brain at risk. And in my practice, and I've checked omega index in thousands and thousands of patients in a heart clinic, it is the number one biggest nutritional deficiency. And maybe 40% of my patients are vegan, but many are just omnivores from the community. They're omega-3 deficient too. That's a rare patient that's eating a lot of salmon that isn't. So it's a huge nutritional deficiency to replace. We have to be a little cautious because I think Dr. Cousins got it wrong. The latest data is, and Dr. Fuhrman just alluded to it, very high levels of fish oil may actually trigger atrial fibrillation, 4 grams a day and more, which is a lot. Very often we're using well below 1,000 milligrams a day, 4,000 milligrams a day and up may trigger atrial fibrillation. So there is a little balance there. Not always is it more is better. I will finally say 2 last comments on Dr. Cousins' topics. A doctor I very much esteem. I don't think I'd ever see the day that Dr. Cousins would quote David Perlmutter. I like David. I think he's a personable guy. He's a great fisherman. I mean, his diet is a meat-heavy, ketogenic, anti-plant-based diet. I mean, he may eat a big kale salad. I'm not sure he eats kale. Some of the ketogenic people make fun of kale, like Dave Asprey, as a undigestible green. But that's not who I would look to quote for my nutritional resources is Dr. Perlmutter, as much as he is a heck of a nice guy. And this idea that a low serum cholesterol promotes dementia is an old and scientifically invalid reverse causation finding. The majority of dementia has to relate with vascular blood supply, and whether it's macro-carotid, vertebral disease or micro small vessel white matter ischemic demyelination. If you've got clean arteries to your brain all the way out to the multiple branches, which is going to be contributed by a lower LDL cholesterol, you're going to avoid dementia. So the idea, it's very dangerous to hear a doctor as famous as Dr. Cousins say a high cholesterol is to be encouraged. It's contrary to the 1,000 people a day that drop dead suddenly from cardiovascular disease, some of whom are dying predominantly due to high LDL cholesterol. It's a disservice.
What I would like to say is the following. So yes, I agree with both of the previous comments, especially with the study looking at high carbohydrates. They're talking about the wrong carbohydrates, right? So they're usually, and especially in that population of 60 and older in the standard American diet in a study, they're not eating beans and complex carbohydrates. They're usually eating and measuring simple refined carbohydrates. But going to this omega-3 issue, what we do in our practice for the last, since the testing has been available for the last 10 years, is that since we convert all our patients to a plant-based diet, and everybody's been told to eat more, omega-3 foods, right? Like walnuts and flax and chia and hemp, all great, which what we do is that we can actually measure not just the omega-3 index, like their total score, but we like to actually measure the conversion of the omega-3s, right? So we can look at delta-6 desaturase enzymes. We can look at all the other B vitamins, magnesium, zinc, all the B vitamins that actually will help the conversion from ALA all the way to EPA to DHA. So this is where when people actually eat a whole food plant-based diet, which will help everything, but there's going to be a large part of the population where we have sometimes conversion issues. It's not that they're vegan, but when we actually study those patients, because I have a lot of people who will eventually see me and they already have followed these 2 wonderful physicians. They're already whole food plant-based. So it's all hardcore. Great. But then when we look at them and then we test their nutrition is off. Now, why is it? Are they not eating correctly? No, they're not eating correctly. They're actually eating the best diet possible. However, then we have to look at other things like their microbiome and actually look at conversion issues, because most of these people will have some kind of increased intestinal permeability issue or other aspects that are going on that is making this wonderful diet not really as supportive or effective in that individual. So yes, we still want people to eat a whole food plant-based diet. And yes, we do test everybody. And then we can see, like in my practice clinically, we have about 20% of the people coming in, regardless of vegan or not, will have conversion issues. And for those patients, I will then recommend a plant-based oil. In fact, I actually helped one of the companies do that 6 years ago, which is a major supplier now of these algae oils. But for the other 80% that I see clinically, I'm like, hey, just eat more of these things, and we have to fix the nutritional deficiencies. And then all of a sudden, your body will metabolically convert correctly. And so we can measure that. So I do agree with what they've said before. We just now have to kind of individualize. Otherwise, the media will say, oh, this is a problem, or vegans have this problem. Now, also going to the question of dementia in a vegan population. So it's not just the diet, so again, we see patients as well. And, we have these patients who've moved over and they still end up having some type of dementia or cognitive disorder. But we also see then again, microbiome problems with them. We also see nutritional deficiencies still with them. We also see food sensitivities with them causing inflammation in the brain. And more importantly, we're now actually seeing a lot of environmental toxicity, unfortunately, which is getting worse over time, right? Because we're all getting exposed to, like Dr. Fuhrman mentioned, in all the waterways and the food and the environment. And so when we see a cognitive patient that has a problem, they actually, in our practice, have a higher rate and risk, just like certain cancers have a higher rate and risk of having certain types of exposures environmentally. So I don't want everybody to feel like, oh, I did this diet and it failed because they got dementia. It's like, no, they're doing the best they can, but we now have to look at the other contributing causes that also cause inflammation in the brain or toxicity into the brain, or cognitive decline, or even cardiovascular problems.
So just to be clear, so very specifically, what exactly should we do to avoid ever getting dementia?
I guess it's my turn.
Check your blood pressure, know your hemoglobin A1C, know your lipid numbers, make sure you don't have sleep apnea, avoid atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation is a big contributor to dementia. And I would supplement and maintain a high omega-3 index, in the normal range, but not walk around low. That would be what I would do. And I would have good parents that didn't have ApoE4 that they gave me.
For our standpoint, we always want to optimize on top of everything he just said, just to optimize looking at, is there any other toxicities? Is there any other inflammatory triggers, even in the plant-based diet? Because we can have sensitivities to food that also trigger chronic inflammation. Also hydration, exercise, sociability, keeping the cognitive function going, because we know that social isolation and not having interaction actually increases also these risks. So some people can be eating a plant-based diet. If they're living by themselves, they have a higher risk. So there's other things that we can also be doing as just a general lifestyle, in addition to diet, that can help with lowering dementia.
Well, I agree with the most of what was said, but I'll highlight maybe the couple of things I disagree with. One is that that I don't think it's possible in people who have a very low omega-3 index to manipulate their supplements or their nutritional deficiencies or anything to bring them up to a high level without giving them supplemental EPA and DHA. Yeah. That's been experimentally unproven, and I've been practicing that for years and years, and watching people who are using all kinds of nutritional supplemental gymnastics and dietary modifications. That in people, it's mostly a genetically determined ability to convert ALA to EPA and DHA adequately. And some people on a vegan diet can convert adequately, and many people cannot. And you're not going to take the majority who cannot and manipulate their supplements or any of their diet to enable them to convert that, because it's a genetically determined issue. So I want to disagree with that, Dr. Pai. But in any case, it's so critically important, and you can't just fix it and expect the brain to be fixed, because it takes decades of having an adequate omega-3 index. It's your lifetime exposure to salt that determines your risk of hemorrhagic stroke, not what you had in the last 5 years of your life. And it's your lifetime exposure to a favorable DHA index that takes decades of having a good level that may maximize his cognition who are living over the age of 90. And we're talking about people advocating a super healthy diet, plant-based diet, what I call a nutritarian diet. So now we have people living longer with the ability to live to be 90 to 100 years old. So now shrinkage of the brain becomes a major element, which wouldn't matter if the person was eating healthfully, because they're going to die shorter lifespans anyway. So what I'm saying is it's important for us nutritarian, super healthy eaters to make sure we're having adequate brain function so that we get more physical and brain health in our later years. And that has to be established in middle ages. We need to pay attention to the omega-3 index, and to make sure if you're trying any other manipulation to get it up there, make sure it's going up there by measuring it with the omega-3 index at your levels above 6, let's say, to make sure you're keeping it above 6 for most of your life if you want to have good cognition in later life. That's not the major cause of dementia. The major cause of dementia is eating junk food and eating an unhealthy diet, and which we're not doing. So that's the major cause. We're talking about healthy eaters now, the major cause. But the other issue is zinc. because zinc is poorly absorbed from plant foods, and the combination of zinc deficiency and omega-3 fatty acid deficiencies could exacerbate dementia formation, because zinc is linked to immunosenescence and neurosenescence, meaning you have more aging of the immune system and the brain and the brain's ability of cells to communicate and brain function when you're zinc deficient. But in any case, obviously B12 is very important, but most people know about that. That's why we're not talking about that. But the interaction between those three nutrients are critically important to protect against dementia. And that's B12, DHA, and zinc. But we want it to happen for a long periods of time, not to ask people to do this once they're 75 or 80 years old. We want them to have these numbers be positive when they're younger, because the brain is neurologic tissue, and neurologic tissue doesn't change that rapidly. So you have to it's not just getting your index up, you want your index favorable for years or decades to maintain adequate brain health. And the last thing is, I agree with almost everything Dr. Kahn says, except for the fact that I've had a huge experience taking care of the most seriously ill people who are on their deathbed in hospitals, who have 20% ejection fractions, who've had heart attacks, poor oxygenation, the most severe cases, who are successfully get out of the hospital when they allowed us to change their diet with advanced diabetes, people who they tried to cardiovert them, they couldn't get them out of irregular heartbeats. And I'm saying that I didn't give them an ultra-fat diet to think that's better. I think the ultra low-fat diet increases this person at risk of cardiac arrhythmia or has cardiac arrhythmia. This doesn't give you beneficial effects. You can control their calories. You can still give them fat adequacy, and having both the ALA adequacy from nuts and seeds, particularly the high omega-3 nuts and seeds we're talking about, walnuts, flax seeds, hemp seeds, and chia seeds, with the exposure to algae oil for EPA and DHA, that combination with a low enough caloric intake to allow for weight loss and fat loss and cholesterol reversal actually enhances the cardiovascular recovery. It doesn't weaken it. So there's never a case where I personally would agree with this ultra-fat fear to take people off all fats to accelerate reversal of cardiovascular disease, because I've had so many, and I gave some cases of that. I've given cases. In my experience, in my cases are just as important as other people's cases who are more famous. My study may be better, they have better pictures and more, better. My study may not be as good, but it's still, I have more patient experience, and most of my career, I've been so busy seeing patients, 90 hours a week, that I haven't produced all the great studies, but I still have a study with 450 people whose blood pressure dropped 26 points with 9 case histories of, not 25 case histories, but 9 cases. But I have, hundreds of case histories but in any case, there's 500 of such cases on my website. But in any case, I'm saying that it's still my experience and input is that that the healthiest diet for a person with even advanced cardiovascular disease includes some degree of nuts and seeds. Of course, we pay attention to only with mealtime, half an ounce with each meal, not high levels of them. That's going to increase their caloric exposure. We still want them to lose weight at a rapid rate. And I'm just putting that out there as what my findings have been.
So I like to just come back to one of the comments that was said, because about nutritional gymnastics, because we train our patients, right, for example, and when we look at the nutrition, we're actually looking at, we can see whether that enzyme of delta-6 desaturates is either functional or impaired. Now, if it's impaired, then yes, then supplementation would be important for that patient. But when it's not impaired and it is functional and they're eating a low amount, they still have difficulty with conversion with the deficiencies of certain nutrients. And we can then measure post their omega-3 index increasing by doing such things. So I just want to clarify that for the record.
Sure, you're not saying people who have a low index, for some kind of genetically low index, you're saying the people who have an adequate desaturation enzyme, better nutrition, better intake of ALA, and restriction of omega-6 and other accessory fats. That's why we don't give people oil. It's one of the reasons to take the oil out of the diet, because the high omega-6 fats from all the oil reduces conversion of omega-3 to long-chain DHA and EPA. So I understand what you're saying to a degree.
So comment on oils, including coconut oil and coconut butter. Where do you stand with all that, just to be clear?
I'll jump in. I mean, I would not advise coconut oil, coconut butter because of the 85% saturated fat content. Generally, it will raise LDL cholesterol significantly, which is not to be promoted, despite Dr. Cousin's comment. There is some data for intestinal permeability, also known as leaky gut, that coconut oil favors injury to the gut lining. And then you can get something called a metabolic endotoxemia, which is basically a lot of crap in your intestines having the potential to enter your body and create inflammation. So I don't find any role for it. I don't want to, create an enormous controversy, but I'm impressed by an ongoing study in Spain called Cardioprev that is studying two versions of the Mediterranean diet, high in olive oil and low in olive oil, distinctive for including 1,002 heart patients. It's the largest randomized study of actually patients with atherosclerosis. And the high olive oil arm had to be ended early because there was so much benefit in reducing heart attack, stroke, and death, along with endothelial function, along with carotid plaque regression. It's easy to say, but they're not a vegan population. And how would they have done if they ate a low-fat plant diet or a moderate whole food plant fat diet and not done their Spanish version? But I think people should study the Cardioprev series of literature, recognizing that the endothelial function studies that were done in normal volunteers that are so often quoted at these conferences had 18 or 20 people that were healthy. And here we have a study of over 1,000 actual heart patients where they clearly were not harmed by extra virgin olive oil. They actually had, peer-reviewed published data that their situation was enhanced. And I know that's an unpopular situation, but for me to take, but it's certainly consistent with the Mediterranean diet, with Dr. Walter Longo and his longevity diet, which is almost completely plant-based, but it's certainly by no means oil-free.
And likewise, reinforcing what you're saying, the Prevamid study showed that the longest lifespan, lowest risk of cardiovascular death were people eating nuts and seeds before the study started, who were then randomized to the group that were told to eat nuts and seeds. And that was the group that lived the longest. And that was supported by the Seventh-day Adventist Health Study too, which tracked every type of protein, animal protein, plant protein, which type of plant protein, beans versus nuts. And they always track the fact that the removal of animal protein and the substitution of nuts and seeds shows the most benefits for longevity and cardiovascular death reduction. So why this comment is relevant is because oil is fattening compared to nuts and seeds, and the oil rushes into your bloodstream faster, and you get a high level of calories in the blood, which you don't. So body weight plays a huge issue here. And if a person is going to they need lower body fat. And it's just so hard to get a low body fat when people are using oils, where the judicious amount of nuts and seeds still allow people to continue to lose weight at a rapid rate, where the oil is inhibiting of weight loss. And the Prevamid study also, and other studies have shown that the low fat arm and the lowest didn't do as well as the arm that had even some oil in it in many of these cases, because their diet might have been too low in fat. But if you're using some fat, then of course, nuts and seeds are the way to go, not any type of oil.
I would like to say that just to answer the question about the coconut oil, yes, we recommend people to avoid it as much as possible. It's not a superfood as they might advertise it in the health stores, and people are just taking it like by tubs of that. And so, yeah, we'll see all sorts of plant-based people that will kind of follow something on the social media or the internet or hear something, and then all of a sudden their lipid panel will just go extremely off the chart. And that's the only addition or change in their diet. So we definitely recommended to our patients as well to reduce the coconut oil as much as possible in their diet. And then it's not something that they should supplement with.
And what about olives and avocados? Is that part of a diet you recommend or recommend avoiding?
If you're talking to me, I don't recommend. I don't need to avoid avocados. And if a person has is fit enough and thin enough to handle those calories, I mean, we do control the fat calories so that they're not going to eat too many calories. So calories do matter from any food you eat. But in any case, what I'm saying is that avocados have been shown to be diabetic friendly, cardiovascular friendly, they're cancer friendly, they're healthy foods. We don't need to avoid them. But in some overweight people, we're having a certain moderate amount of nuts and seeds, not an unlimited amount. They're not snacking on them, and they're not putting nuts and seeds and an avocado in the same meal. They're having a half an avocado or nuts and seeds. In other words, they're still moderate. We're still keeping control of the overall amount of food they're eating. Because just because a food is okay doesn't mean an unlimited amount of that food is okay.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Like we have our patients do the same. We want to I utilize avocados, seeds, and nuts all the time. So I do have no problem with that. We don't see that clinically in my practice. But what we also do is, I totally agree with Dr. Fuhrman here, is that if someone is having a weight issue and they're trying to lose weight on a plant-based diet, then I do cut back down on some of that, because, you know, who doesn't love avocados in a way, right? So I could eat probably a lot more than I should, but that's something that, yeah, just additional fat calories, because calories are calories in that way. I have those patients cut down a little bit more on those, but I don't have them restricted off of it because of the health benefits.
Right.
I'll just say it's interesting. There's a lot of studies on olive oil and endothelial function, cardiac function, a lot on avocados, often funded by the avocado industry, unfortunately. Nuts and seeds, very hard to find olive studies. So presumably they're probably pretty endothelial and cardiac friendly. They have an amazing family of phytonutrients unique to olives. Even the olive leaf is a tremendous blood pressure lowering source of nutrients. But it is hard to quote the science about, you know, eating 3 or 4 or 5 olives a day and the impact on cardiovascular health. It's probably positive, but not with the avocados and with the nuts and seeds. Share it around. You know, diversity. It's good for the microbiome to see different foods.
And the other thing I would ask, like to say, is about oils in general, just in terms of like the purity of an oil, that varies from every place. So if you're looking at a study that's done, say in Spain, they actually may have access to actually real olive oil. And, you know, most of the things that people are getting, there's tons of studies showing out about adulteration and problems with that. So that's also skews some of this health benefit, possibly, if there is some, to have some oils. It's because, you know, most of these things have been adulterated with corn oil and other type of soil and other things, as many independent labs have shown. So again, we're kind of moving away even from the real food, and that once it becomes a mass product or there's industry behind it, then it's kind of been pushed like this is something healthy. But we actually can look back and probably say on some of these things, it's not even the real olive oil that people actually get to use.
Regarding a person that eats a whole food plant-based diet, exercises, does aerobics, resistance exercise, sleeps well, is emotionally healthy, takes EPA, DHA, takes B12, does everything they should do, and does it well. Do they sometimes die of heart attacks, cancer, and Alzheimer's, or does this give you some great protection? In other words, sometimes there's this mythical feeling like, well, I'm eating a whole food plant-based diet and I'm totally protected. Are we protected very much, or are you saying sometimes people who do everything perfect, they die, it doesn't work, and it just, you know, it's like not smoking. It's much better for you than smoking, but you still can get lung cancer.
I'll grab the hard part and let everybody talk about the other organs. I very much caution my patients, and I have a lot that really do a great job on a whole food plant-based diet, just by the textbook, by Dr. Fuhrman's textbook. But I caution them, they're not bulletproof, because what we have appreciated is the rise of ability to test genetics and appreciation of the input of genetics. We've discussed genetics a little bit here with our differential ability to convert ALA into EPA DHA, but we inherit a gene called ApoE4 that raises our heart risk. I think one of the biggest is we inherit the ability to make lipoprotein little a additional cholesterol that can, in some people, be lethal. We inherit a gene called 9p21 that may be the most potent gene for promoting cardiovascular disease. So I have a handful of extremely devout whole food plant-based diet heart patients who've had their second heart attack, fortunately not fatal. And almost all of them have easily identifiable genetic inputs. They didn't go start eating the wrong diet. They just did as much as they could with lifestyle, and we had to work through the rest. So we're almost bulletproof, but I never would tell somebody skip testing, skip, any kind of screening, from mammography to colonoscopy, if you believe that these are reasonable tests, to Cologuard, to cardiovascular testing, because genetics are in a growth industry. Our ability to do a little swab in the mouth and characterize a whole lot of risk factors.
I would like to comment on top of that. So I agree with everything that he said. We also like to look at, can we also reduce risk by changing epigenetics, which is what we're doing with diet, lifestyle, environment, and their belief system. So yes, and I will also agree that I see in certain patients who have been plant-based hardcore, can they still have these other conditions? Absolutely, because disease is multifactorial. It's not just only this. So, but it is reducing their risk, and it still reduces their risk overall morbidity, mortality of all diseases, probably more than anything else. So I would never want to just say, oh, just because there's one person or Dr. Kahn or Dr. Fuhrman or I have had a patient that had cancer that was plant-based, that people say, then I'm not going to do the diet. It's like, if you have a car and you're trying to, be safe, you want to have as many safety features in the car, right? You want to have airbags, you want to have, emergency brakes, you want to have side airbags and everything else like that. The more that you add, it does reduce your risk. Doesn't mean that you will never get into a car accident, but you're more likely to get out of that car and survive that accident. And so that's what we're looking at. I think a lot of times people will say, I heard one thing and this is not therefore I don't have to do it. I like to look at it as like, this is all, I'm not a perfectionist, I'm a risk reductionist. We need to be reducing the risk of all these lifestyle, dietary, environmental factors. And that's as good as it gets. Some people will have bad genetics, but it's still a smaller percentage of the population. Where the problem is that people may, even if they have bad genetics, most people won't have the bad genetics, but we're just stacking bad lifestyle. So, and environment and diet and belief system. So we have to be working on all of them. And there will still be certain, insurances that people can still get a disease, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be optimizing their health to reduce that.
And let's put, I'm agreeing, of course, but I want to put it in perspective that still, even the bad genetic people are an extremely small percent of the population.
Small percent.
A tiny percent. In other words, I think that people adopting both a very exceptionally healthy diet of nutritional excellence in combination with achieving a normal body weight, where they actually get their body fat below 15% if they're a male and below 25% if they're a female. Otherwise, they're not. I don't consider a person a nutritarian unless they're moving in that direction or they've achieved it. And then you get that, you've reduced your risk of heart disease by more 1,000-fold, not by 100-fold, but by 1,000-fold. There are some genetic exceptions, but those exceptions are very rare, maybe in 1 in 500 people. I've had more than 10, so in any case, for most majority, even with lung cancer and smoking, the risk of lung cancer goes down every decade they're off the cigarettes. After 20 years of being off cigarettes, the risk of having lung cancer is less than 1% because they're 20 years off cigarets. And of course, it's the same thing here. Once you achieve decades of eating healthfully and you've achieved the healthy parameter and lived that way for decades, then your risk continues to improve and your risk would be exceptionally low. But of course, there are always these unusual genetic exceptions, but I don't want people to be walking around with fear because fear is not a good thing for your health. And I think the freedom from fear is one of the benefits of following this way of diet, because the risk of I could still die, tomorrow by falling off a ski lift or something, or getting in a car accident or whatever, or somebody from the meat industry could shoot me. But
gunshot wounds are daily now, so that's actually a significant risk, right? We have to start thinking of other things.
Maybe some of the other nutritional gurus may kill me, but in any case, our risk of death is so much reduced that we really can have freedom of fear of these illnesses, except for in rare cases. So I'm not walking around afraid of cancer. I don't have to get colonoscopies. I'm not getting mammograms. I'm not getting all these tests. That's kind of a joke, but it's still not. It's real. I'm saying it. Don't feel the need for these tests, and because they have risks. These tests have risks. Doing colonoscopy has risks, and doing mammograms have risks. So I'm also more of a naturalist. I'm more of an anti-medical testing. I'm for, I want people to not to have to need for so much medical care and doctoring, because that involves like fear of disease and an unhealthy, unnatural lifespan. I'm being more in touch with nature and more positivity, and I don't think you have to. And so there is exceptions. I'm not disagreeing with what they're saying at all. I'm just saying I'm lean to give people more confidence and to feel that this will work for them except for exceptionally rare conditions, rare occurrences.
In 2020, a book came out by Dr. James Nicolantonio called The Salt Fix: Why the Experts Got It All Wrong and How Eating More Might Save Your Life. Recently, in the last month or two or whatever it was, Sally Norton came out with a book called Toxic Superfoods: How Oxalate Overload is Making You Sick and How to Get Better. And the toxic superfood says, I guess I won't go into much, but she's basically saying, after suffering for decades from chronic health problems, nutrition educator Sally Norton discovered that the culprits were the chemical toxins called oxalates lurking in her healthy, organic, plant-heavy diet. She shines light on how our modern diets are overloaded with oxalates and offers fresh solutions. So in other words, there's one book from 2020 saying eat salt, and now there's a book in 2023 saying that there's a concern with oxalates, and the people who reviewed this oxalates are people who promote keto diets and paleo diets. So do you have any thoughts on the salt, and do you have any thoughts on oxalates?
So let me talk
By the
about
way, you left out the
oxalates.
carnivore diet. Why didn't you
Yeah.
get the books about eating a high meat diet? Because they're out there too, you know?
Yeah. If I can, let me talk about the oxalates and I'll let the other two talk about salt because I know they have more about it. But on the oxalates, so there's always been this argument, especially in conventional medicine, when someone has had kidney stones, they went to the emergency room, they had kidney stone, the oxalate stone is your kidney. They gave them a handout and it said, "Oh, here are the foods that have oxalates: animal protein and greens." Right. So then everybody just obviously just stopped the greens because they want to eat them anyways, or they said, "I don't want to eat more greens or healthy greens." But what the data will show is they have actually done crossover studies showing that oxalates coming from animal protein is different than oxalates coming from plant protein. Now, and when they crossed it over, when the patients were followed for kidney stones, that the kidney stones only accelerated their growth or occurrence in the patient that are eating oxalates coming from animal protein. However, can we eat too much raw greens that can increase oxalate formation? Yes, we measure that in our patients, right? But what do you do to help reduce the oxalates? You cook your food, right? So remember, we did invent fire. And so I always tell people, like, because we have a certain percentage of the population will come in like super raw, and their oxalates may be super off the chart. So I'm like, hey, instead of eating all raw, why don't you like saute, lightly cook, lightly blanch some of the greens, and we can actually measure it, and their oxalates will kind of come back down to a normal range, putting them out of risk. But I don't think it's what this end cause, or whatever this book is talking about, a danger. It's just that there, again, with every diet, there's these extremes where sometimes people might be going only to one far level. And I think, no, like when we follow it normally, and if you eat a normal diet, and if you actually use cooking methods occasionally, which we should be, that's what we've been doing for thousands of years, right? Once we've had fire, then I don't think that's a problem. I think these are like little things that people like to throw out there, spin out there, making it, like the wheat belly and all these things. They like to pick one thing and then make this whole havoc. The idea is you have to look at all these other aspects of diet itself, and then make sure that you're shifting over plant-based.
I'll just say there's a fabulous review by a PhD, Deanna Minich, M-I-N-I-C-H, on what are called anti-nutrients in 2022. And she just goes through every one, hundreds of references from lectins to oxalates to phytates, and basically blasts them away that, theoretically there could be some risk, but in reality, the benefits of eating spinach outweigh the risks of oxalates in most people. Just vary your food around. I'll leave salt to Dr. Fuhrman.
I'll just say with regard to oxalates that it's only about 1 in 100 people that are sensitive to oxalates. Most kidney stone formers do much better when they cut out animal protein, which makes the oxalates less likely to precipitate out of the urine. But if you're wanting to lower the oxalate in your diet because you're one of those people who are oxalate sensitive, then there's only a few vegetables that are really high in oxalates they should avoid raw, and those are parsley, Swiss chard, spinach, and beet tops. So there's not a lot of high oxalate vegetables. Lettuce has almost no oxalate. That's why the calcium is so absorbable. And in kale and arugula and bok choy don't have much oxalate in them. But in any case, it's not something that's a major concern for people on a healthy diet. It's only rare that it's a concern, and even for those people. And I don't recommend spinach and Swiss chard and beet tops be more than 25% of your salad anyway. And I consider lettuce a superfood, which is almost oxalate free. It's the richest source of sulfoquinavose, which is very digestive tract and microbiome favorable and friendly. So you don't have to. So it's eating a salad with a lot of lettuce is great and doesn't expose you to. So you shouldn't be alarmed or concerned about oxalates, but you shouldn't eat a diet all of high oxalate vegetables raw either. But we can certainly include those as part of a healthy diet. And it's only rare that it would ever be a problem. If this person had an oxalate problem, they're a rare individual and they wouldn't have to go to. But eating meat and animal protein makes the oxalate person who's oxalate sensitive worse, not better. So I think we covered that one.
And salt.
So let me.
Nicola Antonio has made a career of being one who opposes and puts out sort of non-mainstream ideas. He's a PhD in Kansas City. I mean, the most recent study on salt was published about 4 weeks ago, where there was a association nutrition study, the kind we usually get. There was a clear correlation between dietary sodium intake and calcification of arteries in the heart. It was a large study of thousands of people. I think all of us are probably on the favoring a low salt and no added salt, or largely no added salt. Use spices, for God's sakes. They're little plants that benefit us.
And if you've all probably following the politics of food and science, even the FDA now has new guidelines which will be coming out, which is going to be argued from the industry, but that on all packaged food going forward, I think it's, I don't know how many years it takes to implement it, that they're actually cutting back on the amount of salt that can be put in frozen foods and packaged foods for this reason. So I think that argument is like we shouldn't be adding salt. I think Americans are taking way and consuming way too much salt in their diet.
Yeah, for sure. It's, I always explain, and I always argue that the American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, recommending people with cardiovascular illness cut their salt intake down to 1,500 milligrams a day. I'm always saying, how ridiculous is that? Why don't the Pulmonary Association tell people who have lung cancer to cut their cigarette smoking down? In other words, the point is, if it's healthy for people with heart disease to cut down their salt, then we should be teaching it in the school system for kindergartens to cut down their salt, because your risk of a cardiovascular death and a risk of having an embolic or a hemorrhagic stroke is linked to your lifetime exposure to sodium. The reason why some of this confusion in some of these studies is because they track people who are sick at the end of their life, who cut the salt out of the diet after they develop advanced disease. And of course, people who are cutting salt out are also the ones cutting salt out are the ones who have advanced disease. So it shows you, so it distorts the study. It's the lifetime exposure to these, and salt raises cardiovascular death and endothelial inflammation and risk of hemorrhage, irrespective of its effect on high blood pressure. It also has poor effects on immune system function and increases permeability of the tight junctions in the digestive tract, leading to more exposure to xenobiotic toxins. So we're talking here about, we're pretty much in agreement that we should be learning reading, writing, arithmetic, and nutritional science in grade school. And so we don't have all this crazy nonsense going around that people believe in, because based on the manipulation of science and not studying the whole lifetime exposure and comparing one food. It's why red meat may not show a reduction of red meat is not showing a great benefit, because people are just eating more chicken. They're not cutting out all animal products and comparing it to beans or nuts. They're comparing it red meat to chicken, or red meat to even high glycemic carbohydrate. It's the same thing. You could show all kinds of crazy studies, but we have to look at the entire picture, and the entire picture shows natural foods don't contain high levels of sodium. Even natural meat doesn't contain high levels of sodium. Even you live in a forest or the jungle, eating lizards and vegetables and fruits, and the natural diet for all primates and species would be very low in sodium. But the sodium present in the natural foods is sufficient for normal and ideal for normal human health. And low sodium populations and primitive populations don't salt their food, have normal blood pressures in their elderly members, and have the best cardiovascular health.
Okay, if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Go ahead, Dr. Pai.
No, I was just going to say, I think a lot of this has to do with just marketing. Marketing a topic that then creates controversy, which then allows food industry to continue selling what they want to sell. The studies will show that on the average person, they can't understand half of what all of us are saying on the panel in terms of a study or a double-blinded control study or nutrition science and all. The average person wants to know what the data shows is that, I'll give you an example. If you look on a feed, like if I look at my news feed on my phone, I'll be like, eat this on one article, and the next article will say, don't eat this. Like literally in the same day, you'll get this multiple confusion, because the data shows that on the average person, if we have doubt, we will fall back to our normal lifestyle. And so that's all they need to do. They don't have to prove it. Here's Dr. Fuhrman, Dr. Kahn. They can cite all the wonderful studies, which I appreciate and my patients will appreciate. But on the average person that just kind of, looking at the news, or let me flow through my social media feed or whatever, it's like, well, I see this. Okay, that sounds kind of good. Maybe I should go plant-based. And I see another one saying, oh my God, oxalates, or maybe I need to have more salt. Then it's like, well, I don't know if I need to do that. I'll just go back to what I was doing. So it's that simple. They don't have to prove their science. They just have to create doubt, and doubt is what's keeping America where we're at.
Okay. What is your 1 minute direct answer to what nutritional supplements should each of us be taking? Without the details of why, just what is the actual list of the nutritional supplements that starting tomorrow you believe that each of us should take as best as possible?
I'll just jump in. I'll just be in 30 seconds. I think the supplement with the greatest scientific support right now is actually coenzyme Q10, based on a variety of cardiovascular benefits, brain benefits, longevity benefits, studies in Sweden suggesting you live longer. It doesn't often make it into these vegan conversations, even though it is a difficult nutrient to source from plant-based foods, and we make less of it as we age. So it is a heart-friendly supplement. I'm a heart guy. If I had my way, I'd put everybody at least at age 70 on CoQ10 based on Swedish studies, maybe earlier in life.
All right, should I go?
Go ahead.
Go. Second, Joel.
Yes, I'm saying that the three most important supplements for plant-based eaters are DHA, zinc, and B12, the most important. Then there's some optional nutrients that might be beneficial for most people, but not as essential, or vitamin D, because a lot of people don't get, sun exposure, or they have darker skin. So in other words, we want to make sure vitamin D is adequate. Iodine, people not eating seaweed. K2 is still beneficial for calcium utilization. And I guess that's it. They're just those six. Vitamin D, iodine, K2 are the ones that are more, the studies are based on individuals, not for the whole population. Doesn't necessarily need them, because some people have exposure to iodine through eating iodinated salt, or other people are eating seaweed. But basically, what we got to make sure, most importantly, is not to overly complicate this, to make sure people have adequate zinc exposure, DHA, and B12. That's really critical, to make sure you're not low on that as on a plant-based diet.
So I agree with what Dr. Fuhrman just said. What I would add was bosmeric of using an anti-inflammatory to lower their overall inflammatory burden. Again, vitamin D. We also look at things to help support immune system, in addition to vitamin D, like glucan 300, which we have, and we have data on that. But more importantly, what we like to look at is we like to actually, again, I'm a science guy, I'm a testing guy, because although we eat it, what I want to do is find out what the patient's nutritional levels are, and then encourage them to eat more of those foods that are more nutrient dense in that area of deficiency. And especially since the pandemic, a lot of people were taking zinc, which I do recommend actually for all my patients in general. But then actually we started to see a lot of zinc toxicity, because people were having over 50 milligrams, and then other products, it's like multiple products.
Yeah, they're taking too much. Sure.
They're taking too much.
Yeah.
So what I like to look at is first check everything, just like we're checking lipids and we're checking A1C and we're checking thyroid levels and everything else. And then to kind of decide hey, these are things that you can easily eat more: vitamin A foods, vitamin C foods, vitamin E foods, easy. But when they're low, if they come tested low for CoQ10, I definitely recommend them. Or if they're a cardiovascular risk patient or an athlete who wants additional kind of that kind of benefits. So I kind of like to individualize as much as possible, but I do agree with the previous recommendations, in addition to adding a natural anti-inflammatory.
Yeah. And there's other things with marginal benefits that aren't as essential that we advise individual patients. But I think we were just trying to give the core, what I mean, the real core. Yeah.
Amy, where are you from, and would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I would. I'm from New York City, and I'd like to know their thoughts on plain non-fat yogurt.
I eat plain non-fat yogurt from oat milk. I can say the name brand if you want, and it's very low in fat and no added sugar, and I think it's delicious with my berries in the morning and some hemp or chia. So, when Dr. Ornish did his famous reversal studies, he actually allowed his patients to eat non-fat dairy. Now in 2023, we don't have to eat non-fat dairy. We can eat non-fat oat, or I don't like coconut sourced, but there's other sources as an option. And he still achieved fairly remarkable results. But so I wouldn't put it on a never touch basis.
How about the dairy, though? Non-fat dairy, is that okay?
So personally, in my practice, I don't recommend any dairy for anybody. 60% of my patients are cancer patients. And so we know the stimulation of dairy and all animal protein stimulate IGF-1 and other aspects. But a recent study that came out from oncology just 2 years ago at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, the International Conference of Nutrition and Medicine in DC, the oncologist presented some data which was quite shocking, and particularly when we look at estrogen-positive breast cancers in women and the increasing rate of that, is that 3 servings of dairy, which would be just some scrambled eggs and cheese, a yogurt, which they actually mentioned, and then say a piece of pizza or some kind of something else with cheese, and then 2 pats of butter have 40% estrogen and 60% progesterone of a birth control pill. So we have to look at all these all these kind of things that, we're starting to see rises. And, even people like, oh, well, I'm eating cleaner, I'm eating this, I'm eating that, like cancer's on the rise. All these chronic diseases are on the rise. So we have to look at other environmental factors. And I just want to say, like, if your mother's not that, it's the mother's milk of the animal. So unless mother was a cow, I don't recommend. If your mother's not a sheep, then don't drink sheep milk. If your mother's not a goat, then don't drink goat milk. I just don't think that after the age of 4, we should be drinking any other milk from any other animal, because biologically it's not really kind of the thing that our body needs.
And thank you, all of you, for a wonderful presentation. It's been very educational.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
David, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Hi, hello. I'm from Framingham, Massachusetts. You all recommended DHA from algae oil, and I've heard that there is a risk of that this oil is very sensitive to oxidate, even more than fish oil. I would like to know, what are your thoughts about this, about, the risk of oxidation of the algae oil, and if there is any brand that you would recommend on this?
Well, I think I should comment on that, because I have my own brand of DHA oil, and I'll explain why I developed DHA years ago. And because these tests that were measuring omega-3 index were available 25 years ago, by the way. And so I've tested, but in any case, when I originally started taking care of this vegan population, who I saw very low omega-3s a few decades ago, with some neurologic deficits, I recommended they take, and they were staunch vegans. They didn't want to take fish oil. So I recommended the omega-3 fatty acids that were on the market, but some of them were complaining of burping and smelling and indigestion. So I had the oils analyzed, and I discovered that all the vegan omega-3 oil in the United States was manufactured by the same company. It was a monopoly that were made by the same company. So I went to the company and I tested them to see if there was rancidity in the oil, and and it was to taste foul over time. And we studied it. We sent it out to independent labs to have rancidity scores made on the oils. And we found that after 6 months of being out of the refrigerator, the rancidity numbers started to rise, and they rose a little bit each month, so that when oils were on the marketplace sitting on the shelf for a year, they had more rancidity than ones that were just manufactured 3 months earlier. So I worked with the company to see, well, how can I get some for my patients and for my family that we can put in bottles that we can keep in the refrigerator so they don't go rancid. So I started out originally just getting it for myself and my family and my patients, and I didn't have any to market it or just to sell it. I just wanted to get a healthier oil that we kept. So we had the company pack us up with glass bottles, but I couldn't really get it at a price that was. I couldn't get it unless I bought it in larger amounts, and had it packaged. So you had to buy large amounts from the company. So then we started making it for sale for other people too. So that's how I originally started selling DHA oil, just because I wanted to put it in dark glass, keep it in a refrigerator. And then in our warehouse, we keep it in big giant commercial refrigerators. When people order it, it hasn't sat out of the refrigerator for 3 or 4 months. So yes, the possibility of oils, including fish oil and algae oil, to become rancid over months at room temperature gradually increases with time. So if you're buying a brand that's at room temperature, looking at the manufacturing date and getting that it wasn't manufactured a year ago, but maybe made 6 months ago or less, would probably be okay. Or obviously, I don't want to be pushing my own products here, but obviously I watch for this, and that's why I have that DHA oil that I recommend, because we watch the manufacturing date, we put it in glass, not plastic, and we keep it in a refrigerator until people order it.
Also, I'd like to comment that, most fish oil won't pass the test, no matter how much fancy marketing. Most of the fish oil is now becoming not from the fish or even the tuna, which was terrible, which had high toxins, but they now have PCBs, dioxins, and all sorts of other chemicals. But now they're also just, most of the fish oil will say fish oil concentrate or marine concentrate, which means that they just drudge the bottom of the ocean and they take everything in the fish nets and they actually process it, which then, remember, everything at the bottom of the ocean with the bottom feeders have a lot more toxins in there. They're not purifying, they're cleaning it. Most companies will do a batch test once a year. They're not doing it per bottle or per even batch testing. So yes, moving to a plant oil, even if there's a little bit of oxidation, will still always be safer and cleaner than a fish oil, no matter what any company says. Also, with the fish oil, although all of them will say Nordic or something in Norwegian and all, that's not where they actually fish the oil. That's just where the oil is sent to pre-processed. So all these photos of these nice, pristine waters is just marketing. I was a consultant for a lot of these companies about 10, 15 years ago. And this came to my surprise because I always thought, okay, when we go visit there should be all these fisheries and all this stuff like that. No, it's actually unsustainably fished off of other coasts of other countries. They just go there to process there.
Wow.
Dr. Pai, how would someone follow up with you as we conclude tonight's panel? If someone wants to follow up with you personally, get more information, speak to you again, how does someone stay in touch with you and get more information about what you do?
So you can go to sanjevani.net, SANJEVANI.net, and they can go ahead and book an appointment.
And are you available for personal?
Yeah, we do personal consultations in person, and we also do like health coaching or telemedicine. They can also call my office at 505-821-6300.
Okay, and if you click on our website under Dr. Pai, it'll take you to his website. Dr. Kahn, if someone wants to follow up with you, how do they get in touch with you? What do you offer?
Yeah, I'm in suburban Detroit, but I'm licensed in 25 other states and do a lot of telemedicine. I have a little bit of a waiting list, but I always take new patients. And drjoelkahn.com, DRJOELKAHN.com is a good central website.
Let's try that again just so we could pull it up. Okay, so let's see. I think we got it now. Yeah, we got it.
Got it. drjoelkahn.com.
Okay, and
there's a button for my clinic and then buttons for other things.
Okay, and if you need to on our website, just click on Dr. Kahn and it'll take you to his website. Dr. Fuhrman, what do you offer? What programs and how do we stay in touch with you?
Through my website at drfuhrman.com, I actually have the ability of people to join as a member, and that gives them, they could join at a level where it gives them the ability to communicate with me and directly by asking me questions in an Ask the Doctor forum. So it's a very inexpensive way people can stay connected to me if they wish to for my ongoing advice. And they could just join for a few months at a low fee and see if it's helpful to them. But as you know, I also take patients, but I also accept patients for long-term stays at my retreat in here in California. So people are staying a minimum of 30 days. So these people come and stay here for a month or 2 or 3 to get well, and then they're sent home with the knowledge to how to apply this to the rest of their life. And it's not for everybody, and it's certainly a lot more money than people would want to spend. Most people would want to spend, but it's for those people who need it. It's life-saving for these people who really need this kind of care. And so I feel very rewarded and able to have that service available to people.
I really appreciate all of you spending your lives and your time and your intelligence to find this information so we could come on a call, spend, an hour and get 50 years of brilliant information summarized. So for me, I love it. I feel very fortunate that I'm in this situation. I have access to you. It's harder than ever to get access. Doctors, you can't even get through to their offices. It's hard to get an appointment. So the fact that for free, we're getting to hear what you're saying and you're sharing it so generously, I appreciate it. We could unmute the mic so anyone else who wants to thank them can also thank them, but we all appreciate it and want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fuhrman.
Thank you. You guys are wonderful.
Thank you.
That's
ridiculous.
Appreciate your time very, very much.
Thank
you. Thank you so much.
Great.